For over 150 years, the United States government had this official policy of forcibly taking Native American children away from their families. And then in 2024 came something that's never happened before, a presidential apology. But for a lot of people, this just brings up a really tough question. How do you even begin to heal from a wound that deep? To get anywhere near an answer, we have to go back and understand how that wound was made in the first place. And that quote right there, that was the response from Rosalie Whirlwind Soldier of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. It just perfectly captures this feeling that an apology, even a historic one, can feel so small when you're facing down generations of trauma. So to really get a handle on that trauma, we've got to rewind the clock to the very moment this whole policy was dreamed up. All right, let's set the scene. It's the late 1800s. After decades and decades of conflict, the US government was dealing with what it pretty bluntly called the Indian problem. And what was that problem? Well, it was the continued existence of sovereign native nations on land that settlers very much wanted for themselves. At this point, the government had pretty much run through its entire playbook. I mean, they'd signed treaties, then they broke them. They waged wars, they forced tribes onto reservations, and still, from their point of view, the problem wasn't going away. So a new idea starts to catch on, pushed by a group of white progressive reformers who actually called themselves the Friends of the Indian. And their big solution? Assimilation. Now, what's so important to understand here is the huge gap between what they said they were doing and what was actually happening. These reformers, they genuinely believed they were helping. They thought they were civilizing Native people by just absorbing them into American culture. But in reality, assimilation was an all-out attempt to erase entire cultures. And it was going to be carried out with two really powerful weapons: education and land. So the first front in this cultural war was the schoolhouse. But this wasn't about education in any way we would recognize it. The real mission was spelled out crystal clear by the founder of the very first and most infamous Indian boarding school. Kill the Indian, save the man. That was the actual motto of Richard Henry Pratt, the U.S. Army officer who founded the Carlisle Indian Industrial School back in 1879. And let's be clear, this was not a metaphor. It was a literal mission statement to systematically and brutally dismantle a child's entire identity. So here's how this model worked. It was all built on separation and control. Kids were taken from their homes, often by force, and shipped hundreds of miles away to completely sever their ties to their family and their community. Once they were there, their traditional long hair was cut, their clothes were swapped for military-style uniforms, and they were given new English names. Speaking their own language was absolutely forbidden, and if they did, they were punished with brutal beatings. This was, for all intents and purposes, a system of forced reprogramming. This quote from Luther Standing Bearer, who was a student at Carlisle, just gets right to the heart of what it felt like. He said, "They were taught to copy and imitate, not to think or create." You see, the goal wasn't to actually foster learning. It was to just replace one culture with another. But even inside this really oppressive system, some people started to question the whole mission. Zitkala Shaw was a Yankton Sioux writer who, believe it or not, actually taught at Carlisle. She saw firsthand that what looked like civilization on the outside felt like a long-lasting death to the children trapped inside. She ended up publishing her critiques, and for her trouble, she was fired. Now, this war on culture wasn't just being fought in the classroom. While the boarding schools were targeting children, there was this parallel policy designed to assimilate the adults. And it did that by changing their relationship with the one thing that grounded their entire identity: the land. And that was the Dawes Act of 1887. The goal here was to break up the tribe as a collective group. So first, it got rid of communal land ownership. Then it chopped up the reservations into these individual plots, basically trying to turn hunters and community members into private farmers. As a little incentive, they offered U.S. citizenship if you took your plot and left your tribe. And that fourth step, well, that's the real kicker. Any land that was left over was just declared surplus and sold off to non-native settlers. Tribal leaders, they saw what was happening. Even before the Dawes Act was officially passed, the Omaha Nation had already been forced into this allotment system. Their chief, Big Elk, he warned his people that a coming flood would soon reach them. He saw it all coming, a disaster that threatened to just wipe away Native identity everywhere. And he was right. The consequences of these two policies, the boarding schools and the land allotment, were just catastrophic. They created this legacy of loss that we are still trying to reckon with today.
Just to put it in perspective, before the Dawes Act, Native nations controlled 138 million acres of land.
By 1934, when this whole allotment policy finally ended, they had lost two-thirds of it. Over 90 million acres, that's an area roughly the size of Montana, had been taken out of Native hands, with a huge chunk of it sold off as that surplus land to white settlers. And this has created a huge problem today, this checkerboard effect on reservations. I mean, just look at the Nez Perce Reservation. Today, it covers over 785,000 acres, but the tribe and its members own only 13% of it. That patchwork of ownership makes everything from large-scale farming to just carrying out traditional activities incredibly difficult. The loss wasn't just land, though. It was identity itself. The government came in and created official tribal roles. They introduced this idea of blood quantum, a completely unscientific system for measuring who was a tribal member based on fractions. It was a direct attack on traditional kinship, which was always based on family, community, and belonging. It basically created a bureaucratic path to eventually just eliminate tribal citizenship altogether. And all the while, the trauma from the boarding schools just echoed through the generations. Dr. Denise Lajamourier, whose parents both survived the schools, has called these policies cultural genocide. She talked about her father's stories of kids having lye soap shoved in their mouths or pins put through their tongues just for speaking their own language. But this is not just a story of loss. It is absolutely also a story of incredible resilience. Because in the face of all these efforts to literally erase their cultures, Native communities have fought back to heal and to reclaim what was so nearly taken from them. And in that fight, survivors and their descendants found that the path to healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about reclaiming it. They developed this really powerful philosophy, and it's rooted in the very traditions the government tried so hard to stamp out. Language is medicine. Culture is treatment. The very things the assimilation policy was designed to destroy, language, ceremony, community, are now the most powerful tools for healing. All across the country, tribal nations are reviving their languages in their own schools, which are a world away from the punishing silence of the boarding school era. This history really shows us how easily greed can disguise itself as a helping hand. And it kind of leaves us with one final thought. When the very policies that were designed to save a people are the exact ones that nearly destroy them, how does a community even begin to heal from scars like that?